for all our viewers today. Lalit Nambiar of UTI Asset Management is here with us. He's a fund manager and has been looking at the market for some time now, has highlighted a theme on the rural side. Lalit believes that there is a pickup in consumption there. Even governments focus on the rural side. Prime Minister's focus of doubling their farm income. All these factors are playing out. There's transfer of money happening from the urban India to rural India, and because of which a clutch of companies are likely to benefit. We won't talk stocks, but we will discuss themes, and we'll also discuss what is the scenario shaping up. Lalit, good afternoon, and thank you very much for joining us. Talk to us about the hypothesis which you are painting at, and before we go about how to play that.
Sure. In short, what we're saying is that since the 1960s, when we had the Green Revolution, you've seen Indian farmers, Indian farms benefiting maybe in the 70s and 80s by the water coming into areas like Punjab and UP. But subsequent to that, economics in the farm have actually deteriorated. So much so that over a period of time, some of the people who are employed within their farm have moved out to do other work. Other gainful employment in rural areas, but not in cultivation. Now, what has prompted this is clearly the economics have got worse in the farm. So even rich farmers don't want their sons to sort of join in the business of farming. Essentially, this is triggered by the fact that we have two cycles. One is we would call the farm cycle, which we all know that when there's either a flood or a drought or there is a kind of disease, you have an issue with the output and the farmer is affected. Again, if you have a bumper crop, the prices fall. So either way, the farmer is impacted, and over a longer period of time, the business of farming has become unviable or not very attractive. What this does is that in most of these situations, the government has to step in with SOPs. You've already seen in the past, you have MSP price increases, you have Manrega and other SOPs being given by the governments. So this is a kind of vicious cycle. You have two vicious cycles. One is this cycle on the farm, and the other is then the election cycle. So because money has to be delivered to the rural poor, and it's a very large voting base, you have an election cycle. So as you get closer to elections, the SOPs move from the urban or the rich, I would say, to the poor rural. And this is a thing which is repeated again and again over so many years we've seen. And I think this time around the government has realized that this puts a burden on the fiscal, and a better way to do it to address this issue and break both cycles is to holistically approach this problem, to ensure that the farm is viable, to ensure that the input costs are used productively, the costs are brought down, the farm productivity is improved, and to that extent the farmer gains gainful employment, his family gains gainful employment. It also addresses the issue of jobs, or at least employment and occupations, as well as underemployment in rural areas. As also, obviously, if you have more productivity, it also addresses food inflation. So I think this holistic approach which has been adopted by the government in recent years, it's a big change and a big step up from what we've seen since the 70s and 80s.
Okay. Hi Lalit, thanks for joining in. I just wanted to talk about the whole MSP angle over here, you know, with the government significantly hiking the MSPs. Of course, the farmers are still not very happy with it. Do you think that as well, at the current levels, of course, not for all the crops, but nevertheless, for majority of the crops, the MSP has been hiked significantly. Do you believe that as well is a contributor to rural recovery and, you know, as you said, per capita income increase? Would that as well be a contributor?
So there are different ways to look at this. Obviously, the MSP and the farm loan waiver are concurrent things. The farm loan waiver is already triggered in a lot of states. We've seen the fiscal deficit in the states' budgets going up, exceeding targets overall. We've also seen that the MSP increase has been announced from the next Kharif. So over the next 6-8 months, there's a lot of visibility on immediately on income and, you know, feel good factor. But I'm focused more on the structural aspects of it. As I mentioned, if you ensure that you know, money leakage is addressed in terms of DBT being implemented when it comes to fertilizer, if you ensure that irrigation policies and the irrigation outlay is increased, if you get crop insurance and ensure that, you know, the farmer doesn't lose out when there's a crop failure, all these things can do much more. And you, in the longer term, you have this agri mandis being constructed, and you have the ENAM network coming in so that the middleman is eliminated. That all of those are longer term things which I think are far more important from the way that it will increase farm incomes permanently by a small percentage, but nonetheless it's a area where almost 45% of India's labor is employed. So it's a huge base on which even if a small structural shift happens in income, it's a big opportunity for companies.
Right. Lalit, let's shift focus and talk about where would this money be spent when the government actually goes ahead and ensures there's improved rural electrification, when they ensure there are better road connectivity on the rural tier 2, tier 3 side, there is more money going in the hands of the farmers. What kind of sectors actually benefit? Where do they spend that money?
So the way I look at it, or the way we look at it, is that you look at the farm as well as the home, and you look at the expense side of the P&L and the income side of the P&L of the farm, as well as the balance sheet. Clearly, wherever there is a benefit in terms of improving productivity, such as whether it's fertilizer, irrigation, drip irrigation, seeds, agrochemicals, all of which actually improves productivity. If the farmer has a bit of surplus, he will try to reinvest it in his business, which is the farm. Similarly, those who are lending towards the farm, or those who are providing equipment to the farm, such as tractor makers or equipment makers or rural NBFCs, all of these people are also going to cater to the same demand set. Obviously, if there is a surplus and the farmer is doing well, the consumption in the home is also going to be a big opportunity, as will also be areas such as water pumps or any other ancillary category. So all of break them up purely rural or nearly rural, because there are some services players who are also going to benefit given their exposure to distribution focus, and which probably what we have inputs is that they are increasing now. There's some kind of over the next few years. So you will hear of companies in biscuits and other areas increasing their to the small.
I'm just going to take Ajay's point forward about the consumption basket. There's discretionary, there's discretionary, there's staples, and then of course there's the extremely aspirational levels, the motorcycle. So when rural income does increase, and I'm going to come to that as well in just a bit, but which pockets behind in rural, which pockets do you see are the ones that tend to, is it the discretionary, is it the staples, is it the aspirational level?
So we've seen in various governments, if there has been a lot of leakage, there is a reasonably anecdotal, I think, evidence which suggests goes in for passengers, which seems a little on the face of it. But perhaps if you understand how some of these schemes have worked in the past, in the absence of direct benefit transfer, it is quite obvious. It is quite obvious there is obvious leakage which is getting moving into those areas. But our focus is more on the bottom of the pyramid. Out of the 19 crore households in rural India, almost 14 to 15 are in the bottom of the pyramid, the base of the pyramid. And these are the people who are actually going to benefit immediately if the farm economics improve. Because the top part of the rural pyramid is already accessing, as you mentioned, cellular and cars, etc. We think this time around it's going to be the bottom part of the pyramid, which is almost two-thirds to three-fourths of that pyramid. And to that extent, we will be focusing in areas where the lowest, I should say, common denominator in rural will see improvement in income.
How would monsoon play a role in that, Lalit? Or do you think your hypothesis is slightly widespread and more longer-term structural in nature, and monsoon may not actually play a very big role in the kind of hypothesis which you're painting? Or you think unless it's too bad, things will be okay?
So monsoon will continue to play a role for some time until we can get irrigation in the right places, we get the right amount of water, we start using technology like drip irrigation all over. And I think there's a lot of progress in many states, especially Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh and now even Rajasthan, where a lot of this is being implemented. As this penetration increases, I think the dependence on the monsoon will reduce. and that is going to be the major factor to watch out. But this will probably take a few years to play out. It's not that this is going to happen immediately. But with crop insurance and irrigation, I think you're covering your bases well, and we will see less volatility going forward, and farming as a business will probably get better, and we'll see more people getting employed in those areas.
All right, Lalit, just as we wrap up this conversation, we have heard a lot of corporates on the consumption side talk about how actually in some pockets rural growth has been outpacing urban growth. Marico is one example where rural growth in Q3 was 26%. You spoke about passenger vehicles being one area of spending by rural India. So what would be themes, the best themes that one can play if they have to look at rural growth and rural recovery?
I think what are clearly rural companies are companies, as I mentioned, which are fertilizer, seed, agrochemical, irrigation, tractor. All these companies are directly linked to the farm. And obviously there are FMCG companies, consumer brown good companies, and as you mentioned, auto, passenger vehicle, two-wheeler kind of companies are all going to be beneficiaries of this surge.